There comes a moment in life when everything familiar begins to unravel. What once gave you purpose now feels hollow. The relationships, routines, even your own thoughts, none of it seems to fit anymore. It's not just sadness. It's as if something deep within you has cracked open. This is what mystics called the dark night of the soul, and what the psychologist Carl Jung understood not as an end, but as a profound beginning. Because in the heart of despair lies something vital, the quiet stirring of a new self. Before transformation begins, life often demands that we fall apart. Jung knew this truth intimately, and today we'll explore what he learned in the darkness. The phrase "dark night of the soul" comes from the 16th century mystic Saint John of the Cross, who described a painful spiritual crisis, a time when God seems absent and all inner light disappears. But the experience he wrote about extends far beyond religion. It resonates on a human level. Psychologically, it's the collapse of meaning. You might feel spiritually numb, emotionally raw, and mentally lost. Things that once brought comfort, work, relationships, even faith, may now feel empty. It's not clinical depression, though it can look similar. Rather, it's a spiritual and existential disorientation, often following major loss, trauma, or profound inner change. Carl Jung didn't use the term directly, but his entire psychology speaks to it. He saw this descent as a necessary rupture, an initiation into a deeper life. In Jung's words, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The dark night strips away illusions. It challenges the ego. It asks, who are you when all outer identities fall away? And more importantly, what is trying to be born through this darkness? Jung believed that when the soul calls, it often comes as a crisis, not to destroy you, but to awaken something hidden, something more whole, more true. Carl Jung, founder of analytical psychology and one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, didn't just study inner transformation, he lived it. In 1913, at the height of his career, Jung experienced a profound psychological crisis. It began shortly after his professional break with Sigmund Freud, a split that not only ended a friendship but also shattered Jung's intellectual foundation. Suddenly, the theories he had built his life on felt hollow. Something deep inside him began to stir, something irrational, chaotic, and terrifying. Jung began having intense visions and inner dialogues. He saw rivers of blood flooding Europe, a vision that prefigured World War I. He heard voices. He painted strange symbols and mythic scenes. For a time, he feared he was losing his mind. But instead of running from the experience, Jung surrendered to it. He documented everything: dreams, images, encounters with inner figures, in what became known as the Red Book, a deeply personal record of his descent into the unconscious. In this private, symbolic journey, Jung confronted his shadow, met archetypal figures like Philemon, his inner guide, and discovered the raw forces shaping the psyche. It was a kind of spiritual alchemy, a disintegration followed by transformation. Rather than madness, Jung came to see this period as the source of his life's work. His theories on individuation, the collective unconscious, and the archetypal nature of the psyche were born from this dark night. Jung's descent shows us this. The soul sometimes needs to fall apart in order to be made whole. In the depths of the dark night, something terrifying often rises to the surface, what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow is everything within us that we've denied, rejected, or hidden. Our fears, our rage, our shame, our impulses. These aren't necessarily bad qualities. They're just parts of us we've been unwilling or unable to face. And yet, Jung believed these buried aspects hold immense power. In a time of inner crisis, the ego, the identity we show the world, begins to collapse. And as it does, the shadow pushes forward. You may feel anger you didn't know you carried, envy, resentment, despair, or dark, intrusive thoughts that seem to come from nowhere. This is not a breakdown, it's a revelation. Facing the shadow is not about indulging it, but recognizing it, integrating what's been suppressed so we can become whole. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing. I explore these deeper layers regularly. If ignored, the shadow controls us from the unconscious, sabotaging our lives and relationships. But when acknowledged, it becomes a source of insight, energy, and authenticity. In the dark night of the soul, the shadow doesn't appear to destroy you. It shows up because it's finally time to deal with what's been hidden. This confrontation is painful, humbling, and necessary. Jung believed that only by walking into the darkness with eyes open can we begin the process of true transformation. So if the shadow is rising in your life, it may be the soul calling, not to punish you, but to free you from a life lived in fragments. As the dark night deepens, the structures that once held your identity begin to disintegrate. This is what Carl Jung described as the collapse of the ego, a necessary, though often terrifying stage in the process of transformation. The ego is our conscious identity, the version of ourselves we've built to function in the world. It includes our roles, beliefs, achievements, and even our sense of control. But during a spiritual or psychological crisis, the ego can no longer maintain its grip. What once defined you no longer feels real. Jung believed this collapse was not a sign of failure, but the beginning of something deeper. This unraveling may come with confusion, emotional turmoil, and a sense of losing yourself. But what's really happening is a confrontation with your true self, the part of you that exists beneath the masks and personas. In this stage, you may feel suspended between two worlds. The old life no longer fits, but the new self hasn't yet fully formed. It's a liminal space, a psychological death that must occur before rebirth is possible. Jung often emphasized the role of symbols and dreams during this stage. The unconscious begins to communicate in metaphor, offering guidance through imagery, myths, and archetypes. These are not random, they are messages from the deeper self. The collapse of the ego isn't the end. It's a clearing, a sacred dismantling that makes space for something more authentic to emerge. What breaks apart in the dark night is not you, it's who you thought you were. In the silence that follows the collapse of the ego, something unexpected often appears, an inner presence. Carl Jung called this the anima in men and the animus in women, archetypal figures that serve as a bridge to the unconscious and to the soul. These inner guides may show up in dreams, visions, or sudden emotional shifts. They don't speak in plain language, but in symbol and emotion, pulling us toward forgotten parts of ourselves. During Jung's own descent, he encountered a wise, otherworldly figure named Philemon, who became a kind of spiritual teacher, an embodiment of deep inner wisdom. Jung believed that in times of darkness, we are not alone within ourselves. The psyche, he said, has its own guiding intelligence, and if we learn to listen, It will lead us toward healing. This guide may challenge you, unsettle you, even confront you with uncomfortable truths. But its purpose is not to harm. It's to reconnect you with your authentic self, the soul you've long neglected. Meeting the anima or animus is not about romance or fantasy. It's about integration. It's a dialogue between the conscious mind and the deeper soulful layers of the psyche. And it's often in this dialogue that clarity begins to return. When you listen to the voice within, not the ego, but the soul, you begin to discover a direction that feels truer than anything that came before. Carl Jung believed that suffering is not just something to endure. It's a gateway to transformation. In the depths of the dark night, as the ego dissolves and the shadow rises, something else begins to stir, the emergence of the true self. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. It's not about perfection or happiness in a superficial sense. It's about integrating all parts of the psyche, the light and the dark, the conscious and the unconscious, into a unified, authentic self. But this journey requires pain. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The suffering itself is not a mistake, it's the mechanism through which the psyche rearranges itself. The old structures must break so that something deeper can emerge. Throughout history, myths and religions have pointed to this process. Think of the phoenix that burns before it can rise, or Persephone descending into the underworld to reclaim a part of herself. These are not just stories, they're archetypes, patterns that live in the collective unconscious. Jung believed we reenact these mythic journeys in our own lives. Transformation through suffering is not instant. It's often slow, confusing and non-linear. But each breakdown, each moment of despair, carries the seed of insight. If you can sit with the pain rather than escape it, you begin to change. Jung saw the dark night not as punishment, but as initiation. The suffering strips away illusion. It forces us to ask deeper questions, and in doing so, it creates space for a life built not on ego or expectation, but on truth. The darkness, Jung said, is where the gold is. Eventually, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, the darkness begins to lift. Not because everything is resolved, but because something within you has shifted. You've faced the shadow. You've let go of who you thought you were. And now, for the first time in a long while, you sense a quiet clarity. Carl Jung described this moment not as a return to the old self, but the emergence of a new center of identity, one grounded in wholeness rather than illusion. You may still feel uncertain, but you are no longer lost. Something has rooted itself deep inside. Awareness, presence, purpose. This doesn't mean life becomes easy, but it becomes real. Relationships feel more honest. Your voice becomes more authentic. Even your pain begins to make sense, not because it disappeared, but because it shaped you. Jung often spoke of the self, the totality of the psyche, as the goal of individuation. Emerging from the dark night means you're beginning to live from that deeper center. The pieces are still coming together, but they are yours now, no longer dictated by social roles or unconscious fears. Many people who have gone through this process describe it as a kind of rebirth, not into perfection, but into truth. You carry scars, but also wisdom. You see the world more clearly, and perhaps for the first time you see yourself. The dark night didn't destroy you, it revealed you. The dark night of the soul is not something you fix, it's something you move through. It asks not for control, but for surrender. Still, there are ways to walk this path with awareness and care. First, don't run from the pain. Jung believed that what we resist in the unconscious grows stronger. Instead, be willing to feel what arises: sadness, anger, fear. Let them speak. You're not broken, you're breaking open. Second, pay attention to dreams, symbols, and synchronicities. These are the language of the unconscious. Keep a journal. What images return? What emotions linger? Jung called this active imagination, a way to dialogue with the deeper self. Third, create space for silence. Solitude isn't isolation. It's where the soul becomes audible. Go for walks, sit in stillness. Let the noise of the ego fade so the quieter voice of the self can emerge. Fourth, seek guidance. Whether through Jungian therapy, spiritual direction, or trusted mentors, support matters. This path is deeply personal, but it doesn't have to be lonely. And finally, trust the process. Jung taught that the psyche has a natural drive toward wholeness. The fact that you're in crisis doesn't mean you're lost. It means something meaningful is trying to emerge. In Jung's words, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But that's also the beginning of freedom. The dark night is not a detour, it's the path itself. The dark night of the soul is not the end of your story. It's the place where your real story begins. It strips away everything false so that something true can finally take root. As Carl Jung showed through both his own life and his work, the descent into darkness is not a failure, it's a rite of passage. What you meet in the darkness is yourself, unmasked, raw and real. And from that meeting a new self begins to form, not perfect but whole. Jung taught that the gold we're seeking is often hidden in the places we fear to look. If you are in that place now, know this: you are not alone and you are not lost. You are becoming. The darkness may be the teacher you never wanted, but it may also be the one you needed. Your new life is already beginning.